They gave him a new face on a Wednesday. He remembered that detail clearly, even afterward, the day of the week, the particular quality of the light through the membrane panels of the conclave's medical wing, the way the surgical technician hummed something tuneless and three-toned, a sound no human throat could replicate. He remembered thinking, Wednesday, like it mattered, like the days of the week still meant anything this far from Earth. His name had been Commander Elias Stanworth, 31 years in the Terran Defense Corps, decorated at Kepler Station, commended for the action at Vale 9, listed as killed in action during the Myron crossing with 26 other soldiers whose names he still said in order, in the dark, the way other men said prayers. He had not died at Myron crossing. He had been taken. The conclave called themselves the HFY, which translated imperfectly as those who remain. They had been remaining for a very long time, long enough that the concept of defeat was genuinely foreign to them, not a thing they avoided, but a thing they could not conceptually assemble, the way a creature without eyes cannot imagine color. They had absorbed 17 spacefaring civilizations. They collected them the way the old men back home collected stamps, not out of cruelty, but out of a kind of flat, patient acquisitiveness. The civilizations went into the archive. The conclave moved on. They were not cruel. That was the thing Stanworth kept coming back to during the long months in the processing facility. They were not cruel. They were thorough. They were interested. They looked at him the way a biologist looks at a beetle, with a kind of dispassionate appreciation for the machinery. The one who visited him most frequently was a senior assessor, designation HFY, 8-limbed, eyes the color of old amber, each one independently mobile. It communicated through a device clipped to what might generously be called its shoulder, which rendered its speech into flat, serviceable English. "You are unusual," HFY told him once, on one of those featureless mornings. "Thanks," Stanworth said. "Not a compliment, an observation. Your species' biological architecture presents certain opportunities." He found out what that meant 4 months later. The procedure took 9 hours. It was, as near as he could understand it, a form of cellular rewriting. The HFY had been doing it to themselves for centuries, not to become young exactly, but to become other. To shed a used self and step into a new configuration, the way a man might change his coat. They had never tried it on a human before. They tried it on Stanworth. He went in with his own face. The face with the scar along the left jaw from Kepler Station. The face his ex-wife had known. The face on the Corps casualty report currently gathering dust in a file somewhere in the Terran Defense Directorate. And he came out with someone else's. Not unrecognizable, still human, but younger, 10 years stripped away minimum, the scar gone, the gray at his temples gone. He looked in the reflection surface they provided him and saw a man he might have been once if different decisions had been made at certain crossroads. He looked at his hands for a long time. HFY observed, the process was successful. The process, Stanworth said, was something. You will be reintegrated into human society. You will carry conclave monitoring implants. You will report on human military disposition, fleet movements, and strategic planning. You will do this because you have no alternative, because your death has already been filed, because Elias Stanworth does not exist. The translator rendered this in the same flat register it rendered everything. You will go by another name. You will be our instrument. Stanworth looked at his new hands. "Sure," he said. They set him down in the outer colony at Tessara 3, with documents that held up to mid-level scrutiny, a cover identity as a civilian shipping consultant named James Vell, and a monitoring implant behind his left ear that would, according to HFY, cause significant neurological discomfort if he deviated substantially from his mission parameters. He did not immediately deviate. He rented a room. He ate food that tasted almost right. He walked the corridors of Tessara 3's commercial hub and relearned how to pass, how to move through a crowd of humans as a human, which was something he'd done his entire life but which now required conscious effort. The way a man who has been very ill sometimes has to consciously remember how to breathe. The colony was a transit hub. Military freight moved through it. Officers passed through on rotation. He filed his first report within 6 weeks, nothing damaging, just enough to keep the implant quiet. Ship tonnages, supply rotations, nothing the conclave couldn't have gotten from open-spectrum intercepts. He was, by every observable measure, doing exactly what HFY had designed him to do. On the inside, he was building something else entirely. Her name was Lieutenant Commander Adiz Okonkwo, and she was the logistics officer for the 14th Resupply Wing, and she had the particular quality of attention that Stanworth had spent 31 years trying to cultivate in junior officers, the kind that filed everything, trusted nothing, and made connections between data points that other people's eyes slid past. He noticed her at the transit hub commissary. She was running numbers on a datapad, cross-referencing manifests, and she looked up when he walked by in a way that was not casual. She'd seen his face before. He was certain of that the moment it happened. Not him, not Elias Stanworth, but James Vell, the shipping consultant who had filed dock access credentials 3 days ago. She'd processed those credentials. She would have the image on record. He did not change his route. He did not accelerate. He got his coffee and sat down 3 tables away and stared at the wall. The implant behind his ear was silent. He was not deviating from mission parameters. He was, if anything, being asked to gather intelligence on the 14th Resupply Wing. This was, technically, within scope. He opened a datapad and began to work. The thing about deep cover Stanworth had learned in his 2nd decade of service was that it was not a mask you wore on the outside. Deep cover was different. It had to be true all the way down, or the people who were good at looking would see the seam. You didn't play a man. You became one. You let the cover self live in you until it pushed the real self into a corner like a tenant who stops paying rent. James Vell had been becoming real for 3 months. He ate the same breakfast every morning. He had opinions about the transit hub's coffee, which he expressed to the vendor with a consistency that bordered on ritual. He had a slight tension in his right shoulder that he'd invented, but that now actually hurt sometimes. He had told the story of his fictitious upbringing, Titan colony, merchant family, a younger sister who didn't exist enough times that it had the smooth, worn quality of truth. He had been for 3 months, successfully 2 people simultaneously. Then Okonkwo sat down across from him. "You filed a tonnage report last week," she said, "for the Harlow convoy." "I did," he said. "The numbers were off. Rounding error, I corrected the manifest. Before or after you noticed the 14th Wing's departure schedule on the secondary board." He looked at her. She looked back. Outside, the colony's artificial day was cycling toward its amber hour, and the light through the commissary's viewport turned everything the color of old amber, and for a moment he was back in the processing facility, looking into HFY's eyes. "I don't know what you're implying," he said. "I'm not implying anything," Okonkwo said. "I'm telling you I've been watching you for 3 weeks, and I'm telling you that whatever you are, you're not a shipping consultant." She paused. "And I'm telling you that I pulled the casualty files from Myron Crossing last night." The implant stayed quiet. His heart did not. He told her everything. Not because he trusted her, not at first. He told her because she had already assembled the outline, and the only variable remaining was whether he filled it in or the conclave did. And the conclave filling it in would mean Okonkwo dead, her files erased, and him back in the processing facility learning what HFY's neurological discomfort actually felt like. He told her about Myron Crossing, about the facility, about 9 hours under Ursa Thali instruments, about HFY's flat amber eyes and the monitoring implant, and the face in the reflection surface that was and wasn't his. She listened the way she watched manifests, without expression, filing everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The implant," she said finally, "what are its parameters?" "Deviation from mission, which is loosely defined as anything that actively impedes their intelligence gathering." "So talking to me doesn't trigger it?" "Not so far." "Because they want you talking to military personnel." "Yes." She looked at him. "Do you know how they track you?" He touched behind his left ear. "The implant broadcasts a low-frequency ping," he said. "Encrypted, short range. Gets relayed through conclave dark nodes, hardware they've salted through the outer colonies disguised as standard comm infrastructure. And if we found the nodes, you'd know their surveillance architecture for this entire sector." She was quiet again. "Stanworth," she said, "Elias." He hadn't heard his own name in 3 months. It landed somewhere between his ribs. "I know what you're going to ask," he said. "No," she said, "you don't. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking if you understand what you already are." He did not understand it, not yet. Understanding came 3 weeks later in the colony's performance hall, during the annual transit relay of the Terran Conservatory's opera broadcast, a tradition on outer colony postings, because the Corps had decided somewhere back in the first decade of expansion that culture was infrastructure, that humans needed it the way they needed oxygen and caloric intake. He went because James Vell would go. James Vell was a man of cultural pretensions. He had established this. He sat in the performance hall and watched a recording of Faust. He had seen it before, decades ago on Earth, with a woman whose name he'd carried through 31 years and 2 divorces and a war. He remembered the staging, the devil's bargain, the old scholar who sells his soul for youth and prowess, who gets what he wanted and loses what mattered. He sat in the performance hall and watched the old scholar walk out of his study, a young man. He sat in the performance hall and watched the young man court a woman who didn't know what she was loving. He sat in the performance hall and felt the back of his neck go cold, very quietly, and did not look at his hands. The implant behind his ear was completely silent. He was not deviating from mission parameters. He was doing something far more dangerous than deviating. He was understanding. Okonkwo had a colleague in signals intelligence named Rashid, who had spent 4 years mapping comm infrastructure anomalies in the outer colonies and had 612 data points that he'd been unable to explain. He explained them now, in 2 days. She did not tell him how. She just told him what to look for. Rashid found 11 dark nodes within range of Tessara 3 alone. 11. The conclave's surveillance architecture was not thin. It was comprehensive. It had been built over years, probably decades, salted through the infrastructure of human expansion the way you'd salt a field. Quietly, patiently, by someone who understood that the most effective surveillance was the kind that looked exactly like the background. "If we pull the nodes," Rashid said, "they'll know within hours." "So we don't pull them," Okonkwo said. She looked at Stanworth. He had been sitting with this idea for 3 days. He knew where it went. He knew what it required. He'd spent 3 months building James Vell from the inside out, making the cover real all the way down, and now he had to ask James Vell to do something Elias Stanworth would do, which meant letting oneself reach through the other and hope neither one of them tore. "If the nodes stay up," he said slowly, "everything that goes through them goes to the conclave. Every report I file, every dataset I transmit." "Yes," Okonkwo said. "So we feed them what we want them to know." "Yes." "And we use what they transmit back to map their entire listening network across the outer colonies." "Yes," she said. "And then we hand that map to Strategic Command, and for the first time in this war, we know exactly where their eyes are." He sat with that for a moment. James Vell would not do this. James Vell was a cover identity and a collection of breakfast habits and a fictitious sister on Titan. Elias Stanworth, 31 years, decorated at Kepler Station, listed KIA at Myron Crossing, had been doing exactly this kind of thing since before Okonkwo was commissioned. The implant, he said, if I actively transmit false information. You won't be deviating from mission parameters, she said. You'll be filing a report. The report will just be wrong. That's a very fine line. Yes, she said, it is. They built the false dataset over 6 weeks. It was, Stanworth reflected, the most sustained and intricate lie he had ever constructed, and he had once maintained a cover identity in a hegemony listening post for 14 months. The dataset had to be wrong in the right ways, not obviously wrong in ways that would take the conclave's analysts time to untangle, time during which they would act on the bad information, adjust their fleet dispositions, redirect their attention. Wrong in ways that would look, in retrospect, like the plausible errors of a human agent operating under stress. The implant stayed quiet. He was filing reports. The reports were his mission. The conclave systems did not appear to distinguish between true reports and false ones, which meant, he realized, that they had never considered the possibility. That was the thing about the Ursathali, about 17 absorbed civilizations and the institutional memory of a species that had never lost. They were patient. They were thorough. They were genuinely intelligent in their flat, acquisitive way. But they had never needed to account for an instrument that understood what it was and chose to become something else. They had made him a tool. They had not accounted for the possibility that the tool had 31 years of experience and a very specific relationship with losing. The day the implant fired, he was ready. Not ready in the sense of unafraid. Afraid was the correct state. The pain was real, a white-hot pressure behind his left ear that radiated forward through his jaw and backward through his skull like something had decided to remodel the architecture of his head, using only his own nervous system as building material. He had been told, significant neurological discomfort. He thought distantly that the conclave's translation technology still had some gaps. He had been ready in the sense that Okonkwo had a medical team 40 seconds away. He had been ready in the sense that triggering the implant was the signal. The thing Rashid's signals intelligence team had been waiting 3 weeks for, because an active implant broadcast at full power, and full power was traceable all the way back to the source. All the way back to the conclave relay ship, currently sitting in a dark matter blind spot 3 light towers from Tessara 3. He was conscious for approximately 4 minutes of this. He spent them staring at the ceiling of the commissary, which was a perfectly ordinary ceiling, and thinking about the Faust broadcast, and the old scholar walking out young, and the thing he'd had to spend before he could become something other than what the conclave had made him. His hands were still his new hands. He looked at them anyway. He woke in the medical bay to Okonkwo standing over him, with a look on her face that he couldn't immediately read. "The relay ship," he said. "Got it," she said. "Or rather, they got it. The 14th Wing had 3 frigates on standby per your map coordinates. Response time was 11 minutes. Good. The Dark Node Network," she said. "Full architecture. 247 nodes across 18 outer colony installations. Strategic Command is calling it the most significant intelligence acquisition of the war." He looked at the ceiling. "Rashid," he said. "Up for a commendation. He should get it. So should you." He said nothing to that. She pulled a chair over and sat down with the particular economy of movement she had when she was about to say something that cost her something. "There's a question," she said, "of what happens to Elias Stanworth, who is officially dead, who has a face that isn't his, who has been, technically, transmitting intelligence to an alien occupying force for the past 3 months. A pause. The Core JAG office has opinions. I imagine they do. I also have opinions. I imagine you do. My opinion, she said, is that a man who spends 6 weeks constructing a false dataset to blow a surveillance network while a neurological weapon is actively installed in his skull is not a man who should be handed to JAG. He looked at the ceiling for a while. What does the face do? He said. Eventually, do they know? She hesitated. The conclave's modification process isn't stable long-term in human biology, she said. Their own cellular architecture is different. Over time, years probably, the rewrite degrades. He considered this. So eventually, I'll look like myself again. The doctors think so, yes. He lay with that for a while. The pain behind his left ear was gone. The implant had been surgically removed while he was unconscious, which was a mercy he appreciated, and the absence of it left a silence that was almost loud. He had been Elias Stanworth. He had been taken and remade into James Vell. He had been James Vell long enough for James Vell to become real, and he had used James Vell to do what Elias Stanworth would have done, which meant neither of them was entirely finished yet, and maybe that was fine. Tell JAG, he said, that Commander Elias Stanworth was declared killed in action at Myron Crossing and remains so for the time being. Tell them that James Vell is a civilian consulting contractor who provided significant intelligence cooperation to the 14th Wing under extraordinary circumstances. Okonkwo looked at him. And tell them, he said, that they can have the full debrief as soon as I've had coffee. The commissary coffee, not the medical bays. She stood. A small thing moved at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile and cost her nothing to give. The commissary vendor, she said, wants you to know that your usual order has been waiting. He didn't look like himself for another 2 years. The reversion was slow, gradual. He'd pass a reflective surface and see a man who was between two things, neither Stanworth nor Vell, some averaging of the two that became, with time, increasingly familiar. The conclave, in the aftermath of the relay ship's capture, withdrew their dark node network from 4 outer colony sectors simultaneously. Strategic Command ran 3 operations off the intelligence the map provided. Rashid got his commendation and a promotion. Okonkwo got a posting she'd wanted for 6 years. Stanworth, officially James Vell, contractor, for 18 more months, filed reports of a different kind now. Debrief reports, intelligence assessments, the technical specifications of the modification procedure, reconstructed from memory and medical imaging, which turned out to be useful in ways he hadn't anticipated. It turned out the cellular rewrite process the conclave had developed was of significant interest to the Corps' own medical research division. Not for youth, for injury regeneration, for the soldiers who came back from places like Myron Crossing with parts of themselves missing. He hadn't thought of it that way. He had thought of the procedure as a thing done to him. He had not thought of it as a thing that could be undone into something else. The Ursathali, HFY had said, had never lost. They had absorbed 17 civilizations. They had built their surveillance into the infrastructure of human expansion. They had found an unusual human and made him an instrument with patience and thoroughness and a genuine, flat appreciation for the machinery. They had not accounted for the possibility that the machinery would look at itself in a reflection surface. That it would say, I know what you've made. That it would spend 6 weeks making it into something else entirely. The morning his own face came back entirely, he was in the commissary. He didn't notice at first. He was on his second coffee, running numbers that were now his numbers, for operations that were now his operations, in a posting that was officially a contractor advisory role, and unofficially something the Corps had been building around him for 2 years without quite nomming it yet. He looked up at the viewport. The amber hour was cycling. Light the color of old amber, the color of Kay Hethvane's eyes, filling the commissary with the warm indifference of a universe that didn't care what you looked like, only what you did. He caught his reflection in the viewport glass. He looked at it for a long time. The scar was back, the one along the left jaw from Kepler Station. He reached up and touched it. It was real. It was his. It had been there through 31 years of service and a war and a processing facility, and 9 hours under Ursathali instruments, and 3 months of becoming James Vell, and 6 weeks of building the most sustained lie of his career, and 2 years of slow return. He had been dead. He had been remade. He had remade himself into something the Conclave had not anticipated, which was a man with 31 years and the particular stubbornness of someone who has been listed as killed in action and found the listing premature. He picked up his coffee. He went back to work.